Harry Psaros, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. I'm so excited to be here.
Harry, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, who are you and what do you do?
I'm the senior writer for Pittsburgh Sports Now, very popular sports site here in Pittsburgh. I'm known affectionately as the Pitt Guru. I founded the first two sites covering Pitt recruiting. I'm one of their top social media influencers. I'm on the board of directors for the Autism Caring Center. I'm also one of the founders of North Fayette Pals, which is a organization for special needs children. I wear many hats, but my favorite hat to wear is dad or father. And that's why I'm here. It's why I wrote the book.
Awesome. First off, you need to be a little busier. We need to be a little more involved in the community. Harry, what I'd like to do is the reason why we got together here is your book, From Struggle to Strength, A Father's Journey with Autism and the Power of Hope and Positivity, came out in March of 24. When I heard you were writing the book, we kind of touched base a little bit before. I'm like, oh, it's going to help a few people. And that's so cool. He's putting his thoughts down. I'm sure it'll be cathartic and therapeutic to write your ideas down. Had no idea the way it was going to take off. Oh my gosh. You got like close to 100 ratings on Amazon, which is unheard of. Having a bunch of authors on. There's some big time authors that don't have 90 ratings on their book. Goodreads, 4.8, 74 ratings on Goodreads. Just taking the little tribe that talks about autism, you have really hit a nerve. From my understanding and research, it's the first time a father, at least I've seen a father, has written a book like this. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what made you write the book and why now.
Sure. It's a great question. So let me go into the research. You just did it. So 17 years post-diagnosis, I start looking into it and doing some research. And there's been a few books that are out there. And I hate to say this, but if you self-publish, it can go into the nether. You can put it out there and very few people read it. But really where it hit home in 2014, I do a tremendous amount of speaking and fundraising here in the Pittsburgh area. Kelly Kane, who now locally in Pittsburgh has founded the Autism Caring Center, started the Autism Notebook. And they had a conference, and there were two of us supposed to speak for roughly about a half hour. The first gentleman got up, and you could tell he got really cold feet, stepped down after about 10 minutes. They looked at me and said, "Can you riff?" And I said, I have this. I started talking, and I was one of the first fathers ever to speak at that conference. Halfway into my speech, I start seeing mothers lining up, 10, and it probably got up to about 12. And the first thing I thought was, you must have said something insulting, or I couldn't figure what I said, but I noticed they were all emotional. When I walked off the stage, they physically grabbed me and said, "Harry, we need your help. Our child is slipping into the abyss. Our husbands aren't on board. We need a male voice to speak to them." And Joe, I'm not shy. I'm type A. I said I want their cell phones. And it led to a multitude of coffee. I sat down with coffee with most of them. One dinner, a couple did hang up on me. But I was able to get through to these fathers. And what I found was at least in half of them, they were just basically stoic. So I say this all the time. If your daughter or your son go and scrape their knee, what do? You clean it up and you put a bandage on it. When you hear autism, that is a very weighty diagnosis, and you're kind of bogged down. And that's where they were at. So I was helpful in going in and opening up that discussion with their wives. So I thought at that time, I think there's a book here, but I held off. And I'm glad I did, because life gives you a lot of lessons. 2 years ago, I did one of the keynote speeches at the Autism Caring Center's Mother's Day conference, and there's probably about 400 moms that were in attendance. And as I was writing the speech out, I called my wife in and I said, "You know what? This is the book and I got to do it." I said, "I don't know when." Well, I got up, I delivered the speech, and I got the exact same response. I had mothers running up to me, talking to me. And thankfully, I caught the attention of Aurora Coriolis Publishing, and the rest is history. But to your point, I'm only months into this, and the book has not just gone national, it's gone international. I woke up last weekend and I almost had tears in my eyes. I had emails from South Africa, from New Zealand, from the UK, from Finland. I'm blessed beyond measure.
You definitely struck a nerve. And you mentioned a few minutes ago, you come from the voice of the father. And a lot of times the father want to fix things. There's ego involved, right, and there's a problem. They just want to, here's a solution. They don't want to talk about it much. So with autism, that's something you have to manage. That's something you have to live with. That's something you have to coach. That's something you have to be involved in the process for the next few decades, right? It's something for the rest of the child's life. Listening to you on other podcasts, reading the book, and speaking to other families that have children that are autistic, there's two ways to go. One, they sweep it under the rug, and then it goes into the abyss. It's never mentioned, never spoken of. Or the other fear is if you address it, they're labeled, right? The child's labeled for the rest of their life, they're autistic. How does a parent navigate, especially a dad, the fear of labeling their child, but also making an impact, not sweeping it under the carpet? There's such
Sure,
a fine
I can address both of these. So first of
that
all,
makes sense?
let's
Is
look
that a
at
fair question?
absolutely. In the emphasis in the beginning of this book is to say, hey, listen, like especially belligerent fathers. Hello, wake them up, listen. And I even have, there's a quote in there that says, listen, jackass, just read a few lines of the book because I'm trying to get through to those belligerent fathers. But for the parents that decide to ignore it, you are doing an extraordinary disservice to the child. And you just said it, Joe, they're drifting off into the abyss. So they're already essentially not at the level of their peers. And it's only going to get worse as they get older. So you think you're doing, it might seem comfortable for you, but you know what? Life isn't about comfort. It's about challenges. So what I would say to anyone listening to this, especially even if they have a newly diagnosed child or they're grappling with it, and that was me for a while, until we went up and received the diagnosis at Cleveland Clinic. And I started to realize that it wasn't a label, but it was a pathway to improvement. And you have to change everything in life, Joe, is positivity and mindset and perspective. And if you change your perspective, it makes it a lot easier. So I started to realize, you know what? I owed my wife an apology. That mommy, spider sense, she knew something was off with our son. But second of all, by accepting it and working with my wife, we can immediately initiate improvement. I would tell anyone, don't think of it as a scarlet letter or a label. You're opening up a gateway to improvement. And I don't care if they're mild, moderate, or severe. If you meet one child on the spectrum, you're only meeting one. It's a really wide array. That's why they call it a spectrum. You can help them by accepting the label and moving forward. I use the analogy in my book. My wife and I love to kayak. Our second home is Bethany Beach, Delaware. We got that way in kayak. But we decided we would do a tandem kayak like a couple summers ago. And when you're by yourself and you're rowing, it's easy. When we weren't rowing together on a tandem kayak, it was hell. We were throwing obscenities out. We couldn't get it going in the right direction. We started paddling in unison. We were jettisoning forward. That analogy applies to autism. If you're both on board and you accept it and get the right help in place, that child is going to progress forward. If I didn't accept it and I fought my wife, my son right now would never have sniffed college. It wouldn't have been close.
Let's hit pause there for a second. So let's go from the beginning. Your oldest son is Gus. Most parents have no idea what they're doing when the first child comes, right? When did you first start noticing potentially Gus may be on the spectrum? What did you notice? Which signals did you ignore? Walk us through that process.
First of all, to your point, it was my first. So not having anything to compare it to was really rough. But my wife spent clearly more, because I was working, a lot more time. So we start noticing things. He wouldn't look you in the eye. If he did speak, first of all, speech was delayed, which is very common. When he did speak, it was echolalic. So I would go, hi, Gus. He would go, hi, Dad. I go, how are you? He go, how are you? Sounded like a parrot. It would just go back and forth. The other thing was a significant fixation on fans, hinges, wheels. And when I say fixation, your listeners have to understand he could sit and spin a wheel and stare at it for 4 to 5 hours if you didn't stop him. It was nonstop. He was sickly. He had bags under his eyes. There was this big mesh of things going on, and amalgam, I should say. And then 2 things happened back to back. And all this was happening. And Michelle, my wife, would say to me, listen, I think something's off. And I joke around in the book and I say I'm the type of guy, which is true, that it could have fun at an insurance seminar. I'm an overcaffeinated, driven type A. And I thought, no way. I thought, okay, maybe he's introverted. My wife's a lot more quiet than me. Then we went to a birthday party, and it was my cousin Maria, who's a physician. We went there, and we noticed that they had handed out pencils while all the other kids drew. and we're interacting, he stayed off on his own and just sat and spun the pencil and stared at it. And she again brought it up and said, I think this is abnormal behavior. He didn't interact with anyone. Then the following week after that, it was back to back. There was a preschool birthday party, and it was at a local fast food place, but they had a fan in the corner. And all of the other kids were huddled around the cake and looking at him opening presents, and he would not leave the fan. And he was also what's called a stim. Stims come in different ways. You see a lot of finger flapping. He would bongo drum, and it would be maddening. It would go on. He'd bongo drum on everything. He wouldn't leave the corner. And finally, his preschool teacher grabbed my wife and said, I love you both, but you need to have your child looked at. I really think he's on the spectrum. So Michelle came home devastated, broken, but a little vindicated. And when I saw the condition she was in, I said, listen, I'm really sorry. If my head has been in the sand, this is my fault. We need to go get tested. And by luck, and when I say this, Joe, luck, we had a family member that worked, it was administrator at the Cleveland Clinic's Autism Center. If not, you talk about your child going into the abyss, we would have been waiting 6 to 8 months minimum. We're able to get in 2 weeks. But let me say this, after the diagnosis, which we did receive, I was trying to grapple with it the first hour home to Pittsburgh, because this is Cleveland to Pittsburgh. The second hour, I start getting hyper-adrenalized, like I'm in a fight in the ring in the dojo or when I was boxing. And I said to myself, okay, I could deal with this. I need to be strong for my wife. My dad was there. He was a great support. But I said, it starts now. And I said, our path to improvement starts today. When we drove home, I ran out to Barnes & Noble and I bought 5 to 6 books on autism. If I were to turn around my iPad right now, I probably have anywhere between 40 to 50 books at the moment. But I decided from that day on, I'm going to fight for my child and try to make him as great as he could possibly be.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So a little bit about the book. The book is subtitled A Father's Journey with Autism and the Power of Hope and Positivity. So why the boxing gloves next to a quote of hope and positivity? Could you walk us through that?
I boxed all through Pitt. I have upper belts in Aikido, combatives. I'm a third-degree black belt in Tang Sudo. So I have an extensive fighting background. So I'm of the opinion that I wanted to bring the fighter's mentality to raising a child on the spectrum. And when I say that, to your point, not in the bad sense or you're knocking anyone out, you think about entering the ring. You go in with what? You go in with your chest out, determination. You think about, especially Joe, you and I are martial artists. You think about every day improving. All of that mindset I wanted to bring in. Let me say this too, and here's my cover. I went with boxing gloves because I did love boxing, and it's so universal. I thought it'd be recognized. And It's crazy how many people love the cover. And gold is on top of being pit colors, blue, and gold is the color for hope. So awesome. It taps into the fighting mentality. Plus, I want to talk about hope. So every day when you wake up, you want to help that child. So when you're in the ring and you're more of a grappling technique where mine are all striking that I've done, but when you're up, if I put my guard down, I'm going to get nailed in the face or I'm going to get kicked in the face. Every day, you can't let up. So when I talk about bringing that fighting mentality, waking up every day going, you know what? I'm going to make this kid better. I'm going to make this kid better. And I'm not taking no for an answer. And having that dogged determination, that bravery, that inner fire to help that child on a daily basis. And I want to emphasize, I don't care where they're at on the spectrum. You got to have that mindset. So I wanted to bring a little bit of edge to the book. There's a lot of quotes in here from Sun Tzu. There's a lot of quotes from Bruce Lee, who people don't understand is an actual philosopher as well as elite martial artist. Okay. So I wanted to bring a lot of that in and have that permeate people's skulls when they were reading the book.
Here's a question. If someone reads the book, they're going to see your 2% rule. What's the 2% rule?
And I love this. Think of this as atomic habits on steroids. Every day when you wake up, especially with the child on the spectrum, think of one thing you could do to make them 2% better. And the parents out there, they're probably nodding that have children on the spectrum. You have meltdowns. You have rigidity. So, Joe, rigidity is mom just made a beautiful dinner, but the pea rolled over and hit the mashed potatoes, and they grab it and throw the plate. And that's a reality. Things like this are happening. What can we do to help that child? I would wake up every day and go, Okay, is there a social interaction I could help them with? Is there an activity of daily living I could help them with? A lot of these children have motor issues. Can I help him brush his teeth? And the analogy I use in Tung Sudo, when you get started, if you're standing still and you just throw a one arm punch, I could hit somebody, it's probably not going to hurt them. But then as you slowly get to the black belt level, you realize no hips, no punch. It starts at the feet. You rotate. You're putting the right knuckles in place. I'm hitting myself here on the screen. But you learn how to triple the power of that punch, and you improve each and every time. So again, taking that kind of martial arts mindset where I need to improve every day and help my child. And it's okay, I think, to even wake up and go, we're going to work on XYZ today and make sure at the end of the day they're doing something better. So to me, that's what I call the 2% rule. It's looking at your child and improving them 2% each and every day, knowing that those 2% wins collectively are going to lead to big wins down the line.
There's tiny little improvements compounded over time, make a huge difference in the long term. So great. You mentioned that this book is not a prescription or a how-to book. It's a mindset book, and how to wrap your mind around what you call not a sprint, but a marathon. Take it from there.
I've been very fortunate. Out about 2 months, we have 90 roughly 5-star reviews on Amazon. I had one gentleman get a hold of me, said, I didn't like it. I said, why? He wanted a how-to book. And Joe, I'm going to go back to what I said before. If you meet one child on the spectrum, you meet one child on the spectrum. What might work for my son might not work for your son or daughter. Not to mention, if you want a thick manual, they're out there. I'm staring at a lot of incredible books that will delineate supplements and therapies and things like that. So what I wanted was something that would synergistically work with those books, but tap into mindset. I wanted something that would really, honestly, if you're a parent of a newly diagnosed child, that would excite you and simply give you a great kick in the ass to be excited and to go out and to help improve your child. So if you look at the underlying themes of this book, hope, positivity, resilience, and grit. And those are what I try to really touch upon, because if you're starting your journey, this is the perfect book. It's going to right size your mind and give you great perspective.
There's a great quote I wrote down from the book. It says, the kids in general do not need your negativity. Life is hard enough. They need your positivity, optimism, and help.
Yep. Joe,
go ahead.
You're dead on. I can't emphasize this enough. These kids had a rough path. And Joe, let me say this. Someone may be watching this right now and go, wow, come on. He got his kid into college. It has not been easy. Joe, every semester has been a battle. And my son just got home for the summer and he had struggled mightily. And I think he was down on himself. And I said, you know what, buddy? I said, you have the highs and lows in life, and you learn from that low, and you come back and you fight even harder, and let's see what happens next semester. So it has not been easy. The last thing he needed me to do was sit and berate him for a bad grade. So I think you need to set the tone of optimism and positivity, because your kids do not need an ounce of that negativity. Life in general, like when they walk out of that door, their house, they have a hard enough life. They don't need it from you. You should be a beacon of hope for your child.
That's so good. Another thing you talk about in the book, which I think is so cool. Can you discuss what you learned from Ted Lasso? Such a great TV show.
I'm not a trained psychologist. My library here is probably 300 to 400 deep between there with books. So I thought I can easily see someone going, okay, you're bloviating. There's no proof of this. And that's nonsense. Because if you go back, and anybody that Googles the Ted Lasso effect, what that show did was revolutionize the way people parented, coached, and led, because it tapped into emotion. It's not a lot about berating, screaming. What it showed is if you set the tone of positivity, great things happen. It permeates into people and great things happen. So I talk about the Ted Lasso effect, what it did nationally, and how you can apply it to your child and learn from your child. Because what I do, I delineate a lot of what Ted Lasso taught, and I talk about what Gus taught me in between. But I think it's important. Anyone that isn't familiar with it should look into it. But it's a masterclass on communication and psychology, and I touch upon it on the book. It shows that it's not psychobabble. It actually works.
So good. Here's another big idea I wrote down from the book. Can you speak of the importance of finding your daily win, then compounding it? That just goes with life, with training martial arts, with work, that daily little win and compounding, how important that is.
My belief was, yes, my son's on the spectrum. He's going everywhere with me. Every interaction with a human being is going to help him. So I would go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot, but we would get caught. Why? Because there's a fan department. I talked about the obsession with fans. So what would inevitably happen was he would see the section, he would get obsessed. I would try to get him out. We talk about rigidities. He would start screaming. I'd have to put him over my shoulder and carry him out of the store while people were looking at me with just vexing looks, not realizing this guy here and my wife are putting countless hours into therapy, not going anywhere, staying home. So what happened is we start working on that obsession, that fixation, and it slowly started to improve. And I talk about it in my book. I will never forget where I would almost have to put merchandise down, leave it, go back on my own and get it. I'd have to endure the screaming. I'd always try to see if he was improving. I'll never forget. Then the one day after 6 months of work, I brought him in. He was staring at the fans, and I could see his eyes going. He would sit there and watch him. And I said, buddy, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, okay? And I said, Dad's going to come back, and then we're going to walk out. I came back 5 minutes later. He grabbed my hand. He says, okay, Dad, we'll go. Now, it was a huge win. That was 6 months of 2% wins every day, though, because we had talked about working on that, amongst other things. So those collective wins led to a much better outcome where dad and son could walk out hand in hand with their items happily into the car, as opposed to making it an excruciating experience. Or, Joe, a lot of times too, I would watch him with every interaction and go, you know what we're going to get better at? Someone asked you something, but you weren't listening. So let's talk about how important it is to listen. Little things like that. But those collective wins lead to a more complete human being, a better human being. And that's all I want for Gus.
That's fantastic. Here's a bigger question. Seth Godin, one of my favorite authors, and he's been a guest of the show a couple of times. He writes books about marketing, the way organizations work and creativity. And he writes one of my favorite books of his is called The Dip. No matter what process or project you're part of, it always gets hard. It starts off like a lot of excitement. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Here's our plan. We're going to work this. But it gets hard at some point. Can you think of the dip in the process? You got to the point where you noticed it, you got tested, you got the diagnosis, you created the plan, you went through a world famous clinic, but now reality sets in and it's hard. Can you think of that moment where it's like, wow, this is a lot?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what your listeners have to understand is we dealt with autism. Then I discovered that my son, I thought it was a stim. But then I have a friend with Tourette's where his vein would go up in his neck. And I noticed my son was doing the same thing. Then we found out that he had Tourette's. So what you have to understand, you have something that's socially limiting in autism. Now he's verbally making tics, another mark against him. Then Joe's like stacked up. My wife called, and this is where I broke down. I noticed at times Gus would listen and other times he wouldn't. And what I didn't realize, he had somehow fooled the school system. He has no auditory nerve going to the right side. He has lost his hearing in his right ear. So he has a right ear advantage, if you ever Google that. So he processes slower than you and I would. So we already had the grind of therapists coming in the morning, therapists coming in the afternoon, trying to keep him focused because we were kind of a neighborhood hotspot. We had a play set in the back. All the kids would come. On top of that, we're scheduling for neurologists for Tourette's. So we have the therapist going. We're already seeing a lot of physicians there. Now we're having to run a neurologist for Tourette's, having to juggle a million supplements, having to juggle medication for Tourette's. And I'm not crazy about medicating again, but we had to. And then on top of that, you find out that he can't hear. It was overwhelming. And I can compartmentalize the majority of my life. It was so overwhelming, I can't tell you. And I think what happened, and I talk about it in the book, the most cathartic, long cry, and I consider myself a tough guy. When I found out about his ear, I canceled an appointment I had with one of my clients. I pulled over and I just erupted for like a half hour. I mean, to the point where my stomach hurt because I was keeping it bottled in and we were already exhausted on our last leg. And then to find out that he had 3 strikes essentially against him already. I'm Greek Orthodox. I have a strong faith. There's my Orthodox cross. I believe it's fair to be able to speak to God and ask about his plan. And I did that day. I sat there and I thought, why all of this piled on this beautiful young child? And Joe, at the end of the day, and it was a bad moment for me, I realized, though, that God doesn't make a mistake. I really believe that, and that he chose my wife and I for a reason. He saw our inner strength and saw that we can help this child. And it's always helped me in my resolve. That moment of constant therapy, having to go to neuros on top of that for Tourette's, and then find out about the ear was my lowest of low moment, for sure.
Wow, that is a lot. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. In the book, you mentioned you call Gus your happy hippie. Here's someone with so much stacked against him. You just said stacked against him, stacked against him, stacked against him, and he's happy. How's that possible? How does he do it?
Let me encapsulate Gus, and this will explain it. So I just talked about, I was retching. I mean, I got done, I can almost cry now. I cleared the tears from my eye. And I go home, hug my wife. She's upset. I got home late and I said, I'm going to go and I want to have like the dad talk with him. And I walk up, but I'm trying to be serious. And I said, Gus, I heard about your ear and just want you to know it doesn't matter what happens to you or how many more things hit you, because we got hit with a lot. I said, Dad will always be here from you. And Joe, the reaction, he looked at me with this Cheshire grin. He was smiling and he says, Dad, I can hear you. He goes, I can hear out this ear. I don't know what you're talking about. Just smile. And that's his attitude. When he walks down the steps, and he is a hippie, when he walks down the steps, he's bubbling. And I say this, it's not, hi, Dad. It's, hi, Dad. That's when you call him, when you're doing anything. He has this remarkable, uplifting, positive personality. And I say this all the time. If God came down and said, you have to change one thing about your son, it wouldn't be the autism. I would give him his hearing because he is incapable, and it's a unique trait, of saying anything bad about anyone. They called it the PBL, the Psaros basketball league in front of our house. I love them all. They're like sons. We had like a dozen to 12, 14 young men that would come and play basketball in the front. And I hear them all talking. And they might talk about a classmate here or there. And Gus would always go, I kind of like him. I mean, it was always this positive attitude. And you could learn a lot. If the world just replicated my son, it'd be a lot better place. It'd be much, much friendlier. I can tell you that.
That is fantastic.
And Joe, because of that attitude, and because he's always so positive, his grad party, it was packed with kids. People loved him because of that. People gravitate to positive people. Likes, iron sharpens iron. So the great part was he helped himself socially by being so kind and being so positive. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Right. Positivity is definitely the advantage. And there's a great Marcus Aurelius quote of the Stoic emperor talking to God. Why did you stack this up? Why me? Why him? Why this beautiful kid has to go through all this? There's a great quote. Don't be angry that this happened to you. No, you should say that's my good luck that this happened to me, because if it happened to someone else, they wouldn't be able to bear it the way I was able to bear it. It happens to the people that can handle it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I tell you what, people can learn a lot from studying Stoic philosophy. So I absolutely agree.
When you learn something, it's not in a vacuum. It usually affects and betters other things in your life. How has learning how to parent an autistic child like Gus, how has that affected your parenting with your other child, Max?
That's a great question. First and foremost, communication. To get through that autistic veneer at times, you had to think about every word to try to get through to them, because sometimes they don't process like a neurotypical child. So with Max, it really taught me very straightforward, direct communication with a positive slant to it to really help him out. The other thing it did, it opened me up to more empathy. You become a more empathetic human being when you have a child that's on the spectrum or a child with Downs. What it taught me was to stop And if he was telling me something, put myself in his shoes before critiquing. And you said dads want to fix things. So we just want to go from point A to point B, 100 miles an hour. And it taught me to sit back and listen, put myself in his shoes, empathize first, and then offer direction from there as his dad. It's really improved me with communication and empathy more than anything.
Communication and empathy, man. Is there a better way to go through life, being able to communicate and do it with empathy? It's so powerful. So Gus, what's he up to this summer? Where's he at right now in the process?
I don't talk about a lot of modalities, but I'll throw this one out. Around his sophomore year, we had Brain Balance Institute come into Pittsburgh, and it's based on the work of Dr. Robert Malello that wrote Disconnected Kids and Reconnected Kids. It's all about neuroplasticity, and the brain isn't immutable. The brain can be rewired. We went, they tested Gus, and we started. And when we first showed up, Joe, he was in what I would call the autistic fog. He was into cars at the time. So again, I talk about the fixations. He would talk about cars, look out. He wasn't always present. And they gave him like 12 questions to fill out. And I can't remember what it was. Big writing, very infantile. And some of them made no sense. 12 weeks. And what they do, Joe, every child on the spectrum is born with one hemisphere larger than the other. At first, it's an advantage. But what happens is they grow, this happens. They grow apart, therefore disconnection. So what they do is work on enhancing the weakened hemisphere. And it continues to grow, and then you get the reconnection. During the process, food started tasting different for him. His taste buds were reactivated. But what happened 12 weeks out, we walk in, they put down the same piece of paper. It was age-appropriate writing. He answered everything very clearly, and he was right there with us. And the teachers start noticing and going, what the heck did you guys do? It cost me the price of small SUV, but I signed up for 2 more semesters, and it was well worth every penny. If we didn't essentially rewire his brain, I don't know if he'd be at Kent State right now. Just finished up his sophomore year. He wants to be either a physical therapy or occupational therapy. I talk about in the book, people may go, wow, that's pseudoscience. It worked. And I'm going to emphasize again, it worked very well for us. It was a lot of work at home too, because you have to do a lot of testing, things like that. So yeah, he's a sophomore now. He's home for the summer. Probably going to have him shadowing some physical therapists, but it hasn't been easy, but he's made it through 2 years in college. And I told him, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and we're here to help you every step of the way.
A couple words you keep bringing up: put in the work, empathy, open-minded, positivity, mindset, connection, communication. These are things for anyone's successful life. The stuff you're working on is just amazing, amazing stuff.
And Joe, if I could add one last one, perspective, and I talk about in the book, God taught me a lesson. I was trying to fight from being down in the dumps, and I was trying to I was wrapping my brain around the lifelong battle we were going to have. And we had to go to Children's Hospital to meet with Dr. Scott Faber, the neurologist, their developmental neurologist. And as we were walking through, I noticed children unable to speak, hooked up to tubes, severely crippled. And I looked at those parents, and we sat down, and I looked at Michelle, and I said, shame on me. I was mad at myself. She goes, what? I said, you didn't just see that. God just taught us a lesson. My child can hug me. My child speaks with me. And I have a platform for improvement because he was young. That perspective taught me something. And I think perspective, as much as being positive, is so important in life. So from that point on, I said he gave me, Gus was essentially a mound of clay, and I had to start forming him at that point. I just felt like it was God speaking to me that day.
Wow. Summing up everything from the moment you got the diagnosis way back in the day, and you hoped it would make the child better, and it absolutely did. It made Gus better, but it looked like it made you better, man. It made you a better person, and made your marriage better, and you're a better parent. But it's a better human being for going through that. Is that fair to say?
I would agree 100%.
Wow, that's something else. Last question, just fascinated that Gus now is in college. He's at Kent State. That's amazing. Doing some research, I hear transitions are tough. Going from the house to a party, or a party back home, there was probably an adjustment going to high school, but then he probably found his friends, his crew, and felt a comfort level. When you leave that bubble of comfort of high school that took so long to develop that comfort, you go to Kent State, you go to college, legit university. How hard is that transition? That's got to be tough.
It was tough. I'm not going to lie to you. I will be very candid. He had, and he still has here, a great group of friends. I talk
Yeah.
about his best friend here, Jacob, who we call Kuba. He's Polish. They're thick as thieves. But man, when he got to Kent, that again socially was so hard. He wants his harem there. He wants his posse, but it's very difficult for him to socialize.
Yeah.
It is, and I'm not saying he hasn't met people, but it has not been easy. I keep reminding him that I think he knows that just life for him in general is never going to be flawless or smooth, but he has to learn from it. So honestly, we're talking about the 2% rule. He's home this summer. My goal is on a weekly basis to work with him on. I'm buying books. I'm showing him YouTube channels on better communication and how to breach that gap in a conversation. So that's my goal for this summer.
Wow. Dude, you're an amazing human being, man. That is so cool. Wrapping up here, I'd like to move over to a part of the interview we call Share Your Secrets. So the listeners can get to learn a little bit more about you as a person. Like high performers like you, Harry, usually have some sort of routine to either start their day or to end their day, right? To get their day right. What's either the first 30 minutes or last 30 minutes of your day like? What's your routine to ensure a successful day?
So I am all about strong body, strong mind. And that applies to the day. I am adamant, and I talk about in the book, about moving your body, exercising, things like that. I like to wake up. Just two things. I love kettlebell, steel club, steel mace, hitting the heavy bag. But I like getting up in the morning and doing kettlebell deadlifts and doing kettlebell swings. You do 100. And you start the day.
How heavy is the kettlebell?
I could get up to 90 pounds.
You do that many with a 90-pound kettlebell?
Yeah, it activates your entire body. After that, Joe, it's not uncommon. I'll grab something like Tools for Titans from Tim Ferriss or Mindset from Carol Dweck. I'll grab a book. I try to read something in the morning just to really get the synapses going. Then I'm out the door, but you have to move daily. During the day when I'm working, if I'm not listening to a podcast like yours and learning something, I'm jumping on a book. Again, I want to emphasize strong body and strong mind. You got to have it throughout the day.
Love it. Strong body, strong mind. You brought up Tim Ferriss, Tools of Titans and Tribe of Mentors. I've said this before in the past. The podcast I blatantly steal stuff from. And the reason why I am a podcaster is because of Tim. Tim's like my favorite podcast of all time. Anytime I think I'm struggling or I did a shitty episode, I'm like, all right, I'll just listen to a Tim Ferriss episode. I'll either learn something how to do the beginning better or a question he asked, I'll write down. Like, he's such a good interviewer. I'm a big fan of his. That Tools of Titans are just so good. Oh my God.
Both his books are incredible.
They're incredible. They're so good.
What's funny is they're so big. And anyone that hasn't bought it yet, it's like that big.
It's crazy.
You could tap into it for years and still find new material. I don't know. It's funny. My book is under 150 pages and I'm exhausted. I can't fathom writing what he wrote and going through the editing process. I'd go out of my mind.
Yeah, he said that the reason why he had a podcast, he wrote The 4-Hour Body or The 4-Hour Chef, one of those books.
I had that as well, right.
And it totally, like, it almost broke him. Like, it was just so thick and it put so much work. It must have like a nervous breakdown where he's just like, I got to stop that, but do something creative. So I'll just do a podcast to recharge the juices. 1 billion downloads later, he's still podcasting. How about this? Most authors like yourself are big readers. Can you think a book that changed your mind or most influenced you more than any other? Do you have a favorite book?
I love The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. It is just this amalgam of Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, General Karl von Clausewitz.
So good.
You could throw them all together. It's an incredible book. I have to tell you, most recently, though, and it's a quick read, it's a big hitter, is Discipline Equals Freedom from Jocko Willink.
So good. How good is Discipline Equals Freedom?
I absolutely love it. I am about helping others. My mantra and my quote is, if you are breathing air, you should be helping others. And Joe, I'll say this, I'm encouraging anyone listening to this, what can you do today to help someone? I preach to my boys all the time, in the game of life, don't sit on the bench, play in the game. The people that play in the game are the MVPs. My son, Mad Max, graduated from high school last week. I ordered a bunch, and his friends, I'm giving him that book because I think it's that impactful. I really think you have to have that disciplined mindset because it does open up so many things for you. So it's a simplistic book, but it's so powerful. I love it.
One of my prized possessions, and I'm not a collector of anything. I don't really collect anything. I met Jocko last summer. I had a guest on the show that connected me with him, and I met him backstage when he came to Philly. And I brought my son with me, and we had him sign two of his books, Discipline Equals Freedom and The Dichotomy of Leadership. He writes on mine, he goes, hold the line, Joe, hold the line. And he writes my son Luca's book. He goes, Luca, stay on the path. And,
That's awesome.
You read that, you just want to tackle somebody. Like, let's go. I'm ready to bring someone to the ground. It's so good. There's some great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. How about this? As you look out to the year ahead, what's the most exciting project you're working on now?
So I'm connected to so many absolutely incredible fathers. And my thought is, why don't we put a book together, chapter by chapter, with, again, Joe, all these children are so different that I know fathers that are raising children that are severe, that are moderate, that are mild, but maybe get a 12-chapter book together, each chapter a different father, and show what good looks like. The other thing, I touched upon self-care, because I'm adamant about this. 50% of children on the spectrum are obese. And often, too, the parents aren't far behind. And I am adamant about clean eating, movement, and working out. I thought about writing a detailed book on the types of activities these children get involved with. A lot of them can't do team sports, but they can jog, they can walk, they can do martial arts, they can ride horses, they can bowl, but at least they're moving. And you juxtapose that with eating healthy. I've been approached by some people that have a lot more social media juice than me that want to co-write books, and I'm open to that as well.
Good stuff, man. Good luck. I love it. Just initially, where you mentioned the 12 chapters and 12 people telling their story. I think that's awesome. I would run with that head first. That just sounds so helpful. And how about this? We spoke about a lot. We spoke about the initial diagnosis, the struggles, the triumphs, the 2% rule, the why to be positive, not negative, Ted Lasso, Gus, Max, Kent State, so much. Harry, if you could have everyone listening take just one lesson away from everything we discussed, what would that lesson be?
I'm going to go to the Greek concept of philotimo. It's the most powerful word in the Greek language. There is no true definition, but I will give you mine. It is good for the sake of doing good, asking nothing in return, knowing that good you're doing is going to have a ripple effect in the universe. When King Leonidas was walking down to the Hot Gates in Thermopylae to fight King Xerxes and his army, he knew he was going to die. I love that book. He knew he was going to die, but he was doing it for the betterment of Greece and Hellas. So it was the ultimate act of philotimo. What I ask is any parents out there that are battle tested and can help one family, please do it. Make your voice be heard. The autism community is very loving. It's very supportive. 1 in 36 children right now are being diagnosed. 1 in 36. There isn't a family in your neighborhood or your community you could reach out to and went, listen, we know what you're going through and we can help you. That's my ask. That would be my advice. Think of your ultimate act of philotimo and see what you can do to help others. If there's not an organization like here locally, we have North Fayette Pals, where these children get together, make one. Make an impact in life. Go and make one. You got to go and you have to help people and ask nothing in return.
Philotimo. Go help people, expect nothing in return. But the funny part is when you do that, when you help people and expect nothing, usually the universe, maybe not through that person, but it comes back to you, man. It definitely, that karma.
You better believe it.
Karma is a real thing. How about this? 2 fun questions to wrap up. First one, Harry, if you could spend the day with anyone, alive or dead, famous, not famous, who would you spend the day with?
Oh, that's easy. I'm gonna throw you a wild one. The one that comes up perfectly is Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead. Wow. And this may shock you.
Go ahead,
Joe, I am a die-hard metalhead. I thought I'd throw you on that one. I could have gone different directions, but let me tell you this, man. I love people that wear their emotions on their sleeve, live their life, could care less what people say, and just go. Lemmy defined that. Lemmy brought the amalgam of punk rock, metal, and rock and roll and put it into one and owned the stage and is one of the most influential musicians in the metal punk genre. I don't listen to anything else. I bet you name Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth. I've been front row, okay? But Lemmy is so iconic, just his image. I would love to sit at a pub in the UK and just talk all day over beers and just kind of chat with him about his life. He was just an amazing human being.
Wow. First off, probably a warm beer if it was in the UK, but the Lemmy from Motorhead, that's the first time anyone said Lemmy from Motorhead. That is awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's fascinating. All right, last question. Here we go. Harry Psaros, if you had to get a quote or a saying tattooed on your body, what would that quote or motto say?
Oh, so Mad Max, my son, who's going to play football next year at Allegheny College in Meadville, go Gators. We've discussed this, and let me tell you what it'll be. It'd be Molon Labe. Ironically, we just talked about the Spartans. Come get them. And when King Xerxes and his army looked over at the Spartans and the Greeks and said, "Put down your weapons," what did he say? Molon Labe. Come get them. Yes, we don't have the numbers. Come get some. The reason I love that, Joe, it's a philosophy, it's an ethos. I tell my boys all the time, don't be a sheep, be a lion. Attack life. Go in and make the most of it. I just talked about making an impact with people. This guy here you're talking to will not sit on the couch. I will do what I can until I'm 80 and dying and breathing my last breath to help others and make an impact and create excitement around me. So that attitude, it would be, in fact, Max and I were talking about it, because I'm thinking about getting a Spartan helmet or a shield with some spears. Yeah, obviously, I'm Greek, so that means a lot to me. Molon Labe. It's the attitude that you attack life with. It's that mindset you attack life with. So I love it. You better believe that. And it probably, for all I know, within the next decade, it will be on my body.
Molon Labe. Come get them. Wow. Be a lion. Attack life. I'm ready to go after we're done recording. My neighbor's going to wonder why I tackle him in his mailbox and try to strangle him. I'm going to go get him. I'm like, hey, man, I just got off a good interview. I'm going to take you down.
Without a doubt, we talked about it. That's going on the shoulder. You got, Joe, life is about your ethos, your mindset, man.
I think Molon Labe is about as good as a spot as any to wrap this up. The guest is Harry Psaros. The book is From Struggle to Strength, a father's journey with autism and the power of hope and positivity. Harry, I just want to end with one line you wrote in the book. If you are breathing, you should be helping others. Harry, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Appreciate you. Much success to Max playing football. Gus, you're happy hippie, man. Thank you for sharing your story. Incredible stuff, powerful stuff. I appreciate you, dude.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so appreciative, Joe, having me on, and I'm in awe. I mean, I'm looking at your guest list, and it's amazing what you've done. So, dude, I'm honored to be amongst some of the great names you've had on here. Thank you. Listen, have a great day. This was awesome.